Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 2 of my playthrough of KSP2 for Science Exploration Mode to pick up where we left off last time. This is how much R&D we currently have unlocked. We got the whole of Tier 1 in the last video, so if you've not got this far yet, then watch the last video. But in this video, we're going to make a start on Tier 2. We haven't unlocked anything from Tier 2 yet because I haven't got enough science. I've only got 111 points, so we need to do something about that. So we're going to go to the Kerbal Space Center. There's the button, and we're going to go to mission control and select some missions. So we've got 3. We've got 1 primary mission, 1 small step. What do we suppose this one could be? Land on the surface of the Mun. So we'll track that one. Now there are a couple of secondary missions which we might be able to do on this same flight. Let's have a look. First, Dibs. So Maxo Construction Toys wants to make an action figure of a Kerbal holding a KSC flag. Blah, 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 blah. Plant a flag within any mare on the Mun. And a mare is a smooth, dark lowland. We can look at that as we get there. So I think we can do that. So when we do our Mun landing, we'll make sure to land in a mare. And the perfect circle, before we get to the Mun, we need to establish orbit around Kerbin. And this mission is asks us to establish an orbit around Kerbin with an apoapsis and periapsis each between 99 kilometers and 101 kilometers. So we can do that pretty easily as well. So there we are. 3 missions are selected. Now we just need to build a rocket. Okay, so here we are in the vehicle assembly building. The first piece we're going to need is a command pod. This is going to be where our Kerbal sits for the whole duration of the mission. We also need to add a parachute so they can land back on Kerbin safely. And we need to add a heat shield so that they can survive re-entry. And then we'll add a coupler underneath the heat shield. Now, up until now, on previous missions, I've had a Science Junior underneath the command pod that lands with the command pod. The reason for this is because it's helpful to be able to gather science at our landing spot on Kerbin. But now we're in Tier 2. The science we get from that is very small. It's not really worth it anymore. So now the Science Junior is going to get expended with the lower stages. So we're going to put the Science Junior on next. Next, we need some fuel tanks to power this thing. So we're going to take 1 FLT 400 tank, and then we're going to add one of these little tanks. Not that little tank there. That little tank there. That's going to be all the fuel that we need to do our Mun landing and return. Then we're going to add a Terrier engine on the bottom. Now, this obviously doesn't look very much like a lander. For a start, we need landing legs. So we're going to navigate to the ground tab and select the LT1 landing leg. You can set it to 4-way symmetry with that button there. And place it. Now, one thing we need to do, we need to right-click them and press leg extended, just so we can ensure that the landing legs are definitely lower than the bottom of our engine. And they are, so we can retract them again. Next, we need means of generating electricity, because this is going to be a long mission. So we're going to take 4 solar panels, 4-way symmetry like that. And I think it might be nice to have a couple of batteries. Let's put this back on 2-way symmetry. Let's stick them there. Now, if we want, we could add a ladder as well. But to be honest, it takes a while. We don't really need it. So we're going to leave that there. And that is our Mun Lander. But of course, it needs to get to the Mun. So we're going to add some stages below it. So we're going to add a decoupler like this. And then we're going to take a big FLT 800 tank. Boom, there we go. Underneath that, we're going to add a Terrier. And this is going to be the stage that gets us from low Kerbin orbit to the Mun. But now we need to build the bit that gets us to low Kerbin orbit, which is going to be the biggest bit of this rocket. So we're going to find that big FLT 800 fuel tank again, and we're going to add 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to add the engine. Now, we're going to use the swivel engine, stick that on the bottom, and that is our core stage. But it's not enough. We're going to need some boosters. Now, our last mission in which we went to the Mun, we had to establish orbit around the Mun, I used solid fuel boosters, which are great. You know, they're cheap, they're powerful, they're lightweight, but they're not going to cut it this time around. We're going to use liquid fuel boosters. So we've added these 2 radial decouplers here. Then we're going to go back to the vehicle assembly building and add another lot of 3 FLT 800 fuel tanks. We're then going to add a structural strut here, just to reduce the risk of it wobbling around. And then, rather than using the swivel engine, which is the only, liquid fuel engine we've used up until now, at least for Kerbin stages, obviously we've used the Terrier for vacuum flight, but now we're going to use the Reliant engine. As you can see, it looks visually fairly similar to the swivel, but there's a couple of key differences. The main one is that the swivel can gimbal. It can steer itself. See, we can actually go on advanced controls and see, gimbal limit. That's how the rocket is going to steer. The Reliant engine can't gimbal. It just fires in one direction. It's also much more powerful than the swivel, and it's lighter. So it makes a really good side booster engine. It's also slightly less efficient. If you have a look at the information panel here for the Reliant, you can see that the ISP in an atmosphere is 260 seconds, whereas the ISP is 280 seconds for the Reliant. That means that although there's the same amount of fuel in each of these stages, these two side boosters will actually run out of fuel before the central core. If we wanted to be fancy about things, we could actually change the thrust limiter of that central engine, but to keep things simple, we're just going to keep everything at their default values. We're going to add a nose cone, and hey presto, I'd say that's a pretty nifty looking rocket. We can of course add a little paint scheme. Let's go for a nice... I think actually we can just run the painting process through time-lapse, because the paint tool is pretty intuitive. You shouldn't need too much help with it, hopefully, and hey, you can play around with it for yourself and express your own creativity. And there we have it. We just need to sort out our staging. So at the moment when we press space, only these two side engines will fire. So we need to take this engine, the central swivel engine, and drag it into the first stage, and we can just make sure everything else is staged correctly. So these engines fire, then the side boosters detach, then that decoupler fires, then that Terrier engine fires, then that decoupler fires, then that Terrier engine fires, and then that... All looking good. One final thing to note about the design, you'll see I've got these engines slightly below the central core. That's just a nice little trick you can do to help ensure that the boosters won't hit the central core stage when they detach. In fact, in order to make the separation guaranteed to be as clean as possible, I'm going to add some little Sepratron engines, just like we did for our first Mun rocket in the first video. With our solid fuel booster, we're going to put these side boosters on here. These will fire towards the central core, pushing these side boosters away. Obviously, these are now firing in the wrong stage. We're going to add these to the decouplers. And there we have it. Now, if you instead want to design your own rocket instead of following along with this video, then there is a super useful tool in KSP2, and it's this, the trip planner. We can type in that we want a round trip, select the Mun, it was already selected when I opened this tool, and look, it tells you how much delta V you need for each phase of the mission. So you need 3,400 meters per second to reach low Kerbin orbit. Then from there, here are all the steps we need to complete the mission. And you can see how much delta V is in each individual stage by clicking the little cogs tab. As you can see, here's our delta V readout for each one. Now, you have to bear in mind this isn't completely accurate to real life. So after returning from the surface of the Mun, we'll end up in Low Mun Orbit. It then will not take 860 meters per second of delta V and then an additional 3,400 meters per second of delta V to get back home. It's just done this number in reverse. It's assuming we want to go from Low Mun Orbit to Low Kerbin Orbit again. But we don't need to go back to Low Kerbin Orbit. We can just go straight to Kerbin re-entry. And obviously, it will cost us no delta V to actually get down to the surface of Kerbin, because we can just use a heat shield and a parachute to decelerate to 0. So take it with a somewhat grain of salt for the return trip. The main ones you want to be paying attention to are how to get to your destination from low Kerbin orbit, and how much delta V it will take to get from the low orbit of wherever you're going down to the surface, and then back from the surface to orbit again. But bear in mind, any body in the game with an atmosphere like Eve or Juno or Lathe, you can essentially consider it 0 meters per second to do the landing, because you can just use parachutes. So this is a really useful tool, but it is good to be aware of its quirks. Anyway, back to flying the rocket that we designed earlier in the video. Here we are going to the launch pad. And I'm not that happy with how it looks, because look, we're going to be tipping over that way. I'm sort of showing you with the mouse. Which means that this booster is going to be above the core stage, this booster is going to be below the core stage. So it's going to be a bit awkward when they detach, because there's a higher risk that this is just going to drop down, hit the central stage. Ideally, we want the rocket rotated by 90 degrees, and we can do this just by spinning it in the VAB, I guess, but let's take this as a learning opportunity. Upon liftoff, we're going to rotate 90 degrees by holding the Q or the E keys on the keyboard. As you can see, we've now taken flight. I'm holding down the Q key, and then, as the rocket rolls, I'm then just tapping it, because we won't stop dead. There is inertia after all, so slow your roll down as you approach your desired angle, and you can start cancelling out the rotation by using the E key if you used Q, or the Q key if you used E. And now that's done, look, we've just hit 500 meters in altitude, so let's commence our gravity turn. We still want to launch along the 90-degree vector along the nav ball, but unlike our last two orbital launches, the 90-degree vector is now at the 6 o'clock position because of that rotation move we did. So instead of using the D key to tip over, we now need to be tapping the W key instead. Essentially, that white marker in the middle of the nav ball is the nose of our rocket, and we're moving the nav ball around underneath it in order to steer. When flying, I am basically never looking at the rocket itself, just the nav ball. Now, while the gravity turn is happening, take a look at the engines. Do you see what I mean? About the gimbal of that central engine? That's why we use the swivel for the core stage. It's letting the rocket steer itself, because those reliant engines, they just stay firing along that fixed vector in a reliant way. That was terrible. Anyway, like before, I aimed to hit 45 degrees of tilt when we hit 10 kilometers in altitude, which is now passed, but I think I did a pretty decent job. I might have overshot a little bit, but don't worry about getting things exactly right. It's not rocket science after all. I'm sure no one's made that joke before. Anyway, as you might have noticed looking at the white marker on the nav board, we've been trying to keep the central dot within the green prograde vector. Deviating from that too much, especially in the thicker parts of the atmosphere, starts putting lots of drag on the rocket's fuselage and puts you at very high risk of tipping over. So we want to kind of stay as close to the prograde marker as possible in order to ensure that our rocket maintains stable flight. It also helps to ensure that when we detach the side boosters, they separate as cleanly as possible, which, look at that, for timing just happened, and I think it went pretty well. We've still got a little bit of delta V left in that core stage, so now I'm watching our apoapsis. Again, trying to follow the prograde markers somewhat, although we're quite far away from our apoapsis now, so we really want to be tipping over. But look, we've got some temperature gauges appearing on those batteries. So I throttled down because we're clearly going too fast in the atmosphere, and the friction from the air is heating up those batteries, and if they get too hot, they'll explode. So I throttled way down and just watched our apoapsis until it got to a nice round 100 kilometers. Because remember, we accepted the contract, a perfect circle, which we need to get a perfectly circular orbit around Kerbin between 99 and 101 kilometers. So 100, nice round number between the two. But now that's done, I've killed the throttle, and now we're just going to follow the prograde marker to try and reduce drag as much as possible. And oh, those temperature gauges are still heating up. I don't know if this is just a bit of a weird quirk with the current state of the game, because as of the time of the recording of this video, heating and thermal effects have only just been added. I think at the moment, it's a little bit cruel, it's a little bit overpowered, so there's every chance there's going to be an update in the not too distant future that reduces the thermal sensitivity of certain parts during ascent. So you may not have this problem if you're watching this video in the future. Now we need to plot our perfect circle. So I've made a maneuver node at apoapsis and waited to the point at which the apoapsis and periapsis markers started to switch around, because that's the most circular point. But our periapsis is 76 kilometers and our apoapsis is 127, so not really circular at all. So we actually need to grab our maneuver plan and reposition it to be slightly before our Kerbin apoapsis. Then we can push and pull on the prograde marker again until we've once again reached that point where the periapsis and apoapsis want to swap sides, and then we can reposition the maneuver plan again until we get a nice perfect circle. There you are, apoapsis and periapsis of 99 kilometers. So pretty good in my opinion. We do have to bear in mind that the orbit that the maneuver planner predicts isn't always going to be exactly the same as the orbit you end up getting once you do the burn, but this is a good start. So, nothing else to do now other than time accelerate to the maneuver plan and get ready to execute. Here we go. Now, I did detach the lower stage with a little bit of fuel left over, but I felt that, we'll just detach it because we don't really need that extra delta V. And hey, if you want to leave it attached, that gives you some extra free fuel, so you have a little bit more to play around with if you can't quite keep up with the delta V levels that I have. I wanted to assume that once you've got your apoapsis, you are out of fuel, so I just staged, and then we could do our entire circularization burn using this stage here. And wait for it, there we are. When we got to the very last stages of the maneuver, I actually switched my gaze from the stop burn in indicator to our actual real apoapsis and periapsis values, which are located underneath the nav ball, because of the aforementioned point that the maneuver planner isn't always completely accurate to real life. In fact, you may have noticed I had to do a small additional bit of burning just to raise our apoapsis to 100 kilometers. And as you can see, we have a notification saying that we fulfilled the perfect circle contract. I'm so happy. Now, if you didn't quite get the contract fulfilled on your initial circularization burn, don't worry. Now you're in a stable orbit. You've got all the time in the world to make little maneuver plans to modify your orbit and get your apoapsis and periapsis at an equal level. Now we're going to open the map screen and set the Mun as our target. We do this by right-clicking it and pressing Set as Target, and then we can make a maneuver plan to get there. So I'm just going to create a maneuver plan anywhere, really. Drag on the prograde marker to raise our orbital height, and let's have a look. So the 2B marker there shows that the Mun is going to be way behind us when we reach the highest point of our orbit. So we're just going to reposition it so that we encounter the Mun's sphere of influence. Let's have a look. There we are. Now, I'm pretty quick with the maneuver planner because I've been doing this for a very long time, but as you can see, we are quite close to the start burn time in indicator. And so if you're a bit worried and you want a bit more time to plan out your maneuver, don't worry, just cancel it. And then time warp past the point where you need to place that maneuver. And now you're on your second orbit, so you can make that maneuver plan again. And we have an entire orbit's worth of time to plan it. Now, this is the current version of KSP2, so I'm recording this in January of 2024. At some point, there's going to be an update that adds a skip orbit button. I have no idea what this is going to look like, obviously, because I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, but this may well exist in your version of the game. So instead of having to just time warp past the maneuver plan and then make a new one, you can just press skip orbit, and then that will assume that you're going to make one full orbit of the planet before you do your maneuver, if that makes sense. You won't be doing the maneuver on your first pass past the node. If you've played Kerbal Space Program 1, you will hopefully maybe be familiar with this button because this button existed in KSP 1. There's a clip of it in action at the top right of your screen, but enough of that. As you can see, we are time warping to the maneuver that's going to get us all the way to the Mun. Now, you might notice the little science notification button is flashing, and I haven't clicked it yet. The reason I haven't done that, I'm going to show you now, we wouldn't get any science, because we've already done Science Junior experiments from low Kerbin orbit and in Kerbin's atmosphere, as well as crew observations in the same places. And you don't get science every time you do the same experiment in the same place. You have to do the experiments in unique places in order to get science points. So there's no point running the science experiments that we have until we perform our Mun touchdown. We, of course, already have research data from Mun Orbit because in our last launch, we went to Mun Orbit. We just didn't do a Mun Landing because at the time, we didn't have the contract available to us. Now, as you can see, we didn't quite have enough Delta V in this stage to get us all the way to the Mun, so we're going to have to detach it right at the last moment to perform the rest of the burn using our final stage, the Lander stage. Well, I mean, I guess it's not the final stage, literally, it's the third final stage, but there are two stages ahead of it, but one of them is the decoupler, one of them is the parachute. It's the final powered stage, I just want to avoid pedants in the comments, And hey guys, I've got to shamelessly ask, if you are finding this tutorial helpful and you're enjoying the video, then leaving a little like below really helps support what I do here. Anyway, we have now detached that lower stage. We've got 2,000, just over, meters per second of Delta V remaining in this stage. And if you remember from the route planner, probably won't because I only showed it for like 3 seconds, but we have more than enough Delta V to get to Mun Orbit, then to the Mun surface, then back to Mun Orbit, then back to Kerbin. And that's also why I drew your attention to the fact that the trip planner was saying, oh, we need 3,400 meters per second to get back to the surface of Kerbin, and 840, I think it was, to get back to Kerbin itself. No. The whole, you need 840 meters per second to get back to Kerbin, is assuming you want to go from low Mun orbit to low Kerbin orbit, and why would we want to? We can just go straight into Kerbin's atmosphere upon return from the Mun. We're going to get it sidetracked here. We have entered Mun's sphere of influence, so now, there it is. Look at that. We can take a look at it in the map screen. If you want to make it a bit easier, you can right-click the Mun and press focus, so it's in the center of your screen. And then we can make a maneuver plan at our periapsis and drag on the retrograde marker to lower our velocity and enter a stable Mun orbit. And again, I'm aiming for the point at which the apoapsis and periapsis markers start to switch, because that indicates we're getting a nice circular orbit. You might notice again, just like before when we did our Kerbin circularization, I had to move it to be slightly before our periapsis point in order to get it as circular as possible. Although it really doesn't matter about getting it into a perfect circle, to be honest. I'm just a bit of a perfectionist sometimes, I guess. But now the burn is set up, we can press warp to maneuver and then just wait it out and then begin. 3, 2, 1, let's go. Now once again, I haven't pressed the research tab at this stage because we already have science from Low Mun Orbit, which is what our current situation is, because we did that on the last mission where we fulfilled the contract to establish orbit around the Mun. However, if you just did that contract, gathered the science and then went home, you won't have actually got science from Low Mun Orbit because the orbit that contract makes you set is in high Mun orbit. So when I did the mission in last week's video, I made a point of then lowering our periapsis to a point that met the requirements for low Mun orbit science, gather the science and then left. So it might be worth just as a safety net to just press the research tab when you're at this point in your mission. Or at any point in your mission, really. There's no penalty for running science experiments again, you just don't get any new science points. Now I'm having a look at the Mun to pick out a landing spot. Remember, the goal here is not to just simply land anywhere on the Mun. We specifically want to be landing in one of the Mun's mares, the smooth, dark lowlands, in order to fulfill the first Dibs contract and net an additional 100 science points. Now, right now, there aren't that many visible places on the light side of the Mun, and we can't really see the surface on the dark side, so we can time warp for a bit and watch to see if any easier and larger mares appear. This is going to take a while though, because the game limits how fast you can time warp in low orbit. So, to speed things up, we can press escape, press Kerbal Space Center, and from there enter the tracking station. I know you can press tracking station directly from the escape menu in our flight screen, but if we do that, it won't give us fully unlocked time warp, which is what we have by going back through the Kerbal Space Center first. And here, we can just time warp to our heart's content and watch the moon spin around and... oh, look at that! Look at that! That's a really nice big spot to aim for, much easier than those smaller craters we had available to us when we first arrived. Now we can right-click our spacecraft and press Control, and now we're back controlling it. You can tell because obviously time warp is now restricted again. Now we're going to make a maneuver plan 180 degrees away from where we want to land. So in this case, the opposite side of the Mun, so that nice big dark area that we want to aim for. We're then going to lower our periapsis so that it's nice and low and about over where we want to land. In fact, we actually want it to be just ahead of where we want to land because of course the Mun rotates. And so by putting it slightly ahead of where we want to land, by the time we reach periapsis, we should hopefully be over that dark mare. Now, this is a completely optional step. You don't need to first lower your orbit before going in for your final landing burn. I'm making this tutorial video more for people who haven't got that much experience landing. This does make things a little bit easier, especially because we're aiming for a very specific site on the surface of the Mun. But if you want, you can just deorbit to put yourself on a surface collision course straight from Low Mun Orbit. Now, as you can see, we are now sort of comfortably over the mare that we want to land on, so now we can start thinking about landing. Now, as you can see, our nav ball has suddenly changed color. That's because it is now showing our prograde and retrograde markers relative to our surface velocity rather than our orbital velocity. The game's pretty good at doing this automatically, but if yours doesn't, you click the little yellow tab that says surface. That toggles between orbital mode and surface mode. Anyway, as you can see, I've killed a lot of our horizontal velocity by burning along the retrograde marker. And our orbital line is now putting us inside the mare. So we're definitely on a collision course with the mare. Hopefully we can land though. So there are two velocities we need to kill. Our horizontal velocity, which is like, the direction we're orbiting, and our vertical velocity, which is, the rate at which we're falling down to the surface of the Mun. To kill your horizontal velocity, you burn at the horizon point on the nav ball, i.e. where the blue meets the brown. And to kill your vertical speed, you want to burn, well, straight up, or in other words, the central point of the blue hemisphere of the nav ball. As you can see, I'm first of all burning off a lot of our horizontal speed, because I want to ensure that we are slowing down enough so that we are going to land in the mare and not overshoot and end up on the crater's edge. Also, now is a good time to press G to deploy our landing legs. Then we want our lander to follow the retrograde marker, which we can toggle automatically by pressing the little retrograde marker there, little arrow on screen, and that will let our rocket work on killing both the vertical and horizontal speed together. And the nav ball is relative to the Mun's surface, so when we hit 0 velocity, our lander will be pointing straight up and land on its landing legs. I'm now just modulating the throttle here because I don't want to kill our speed too prematurely because then we'll just waste fuel. It's also important that the altitude gauge is relative to ground rather than sea level. Again, the game has done this for me automatically, but you might want to just double check. You can toggle between ground and sea level by clicking your altitude gauge, the little pink thing to the right of the nav ball. But once I'm about 50 meters above the surface of the Mun, I kill our velocity to 0 and then just use Shift and Control to gently control our throttle so that we're coming down at just under 5 meters per second for a safe touchdown. And there we have it. We have a touchdown and immediately fulfilled a contract. So I'm going to go ahead and make a quick save to celebrate this momentous occasion. Although the game will create an auto-save when you touch down on the surface of another planet or moon. And saving a lot in general is very good practice, especially for your first Mun landing. You're probably going to mess it up a few times, so definitely make liberal use of F5 and F9, those are the quick save and quick load buttons, so that you can try again if you mess things up the first time. So there, I finally was able to press the research tab and net some science. Next thing to do is go on EVA and plant a flag, and as you can see on the parts manager for Bill Kerbin, you can see it says our location is in a Mun Mare, which is the place we needed to plant a flag in order to get the first Dibs contract. So are we going to get it? Yes, we did. There was no tension there. I'm recording this commentary after the fact. So with the planting of the flag, all we need to do now is gather some surface samples, which I pressed, but I got a bit of a weird visual glitch, because I tried to angle the camera so you could see it a bit more easily, and then, ironically, it made things way worse, and then the little sample collection tube went out of sync with Bill Kerbin's hand for some reason, but yeah, whatever. Anyway, we have gathered the samples. That is everything we need to do. on the Mun. So I made a quick save just there. But while we're here, I wonder if we can get some more contracts to get some additional science before we go back to Kerbin. So let's go to mission control and have a look. First of all, we can submit our primary mission, which of course was to land on the surface of the Mun. Let's just submit that. Skip through Kerry Kerman's dialogue. There we are. Thank you, science. 300 science points. Look at that. Then we have some new contracts appearing. So let's just carry on handing in the contracts that we've just completed. So there we go. Handing in the first Dibs. And then we can hand in our perfect circle contract as well. Gotcha. Over and out. 100 science. Very nice. Okay, let's take a look. So it's eccentric. Orbit Kerbin with a periapsis of 70 to 150 kilometers and an apoapsis of 300 to 8,400. So realistically, we can't really do this one in this mission. What else have we got? Build a satellite and orbit Kerbin with a probe core, antenna, and solar panel. Pretty easy, but we can't do that in this mission. Escape Kerbin's sphere of influence. Again, not really feasible for this mission. What about the primary mission then? Moon a signal. Mission control have picked up a mysterious signal that seemed to be originating from a fixed point on the Mun's surface. Well, hey, maybe we just happen to be close to that point. Let's track the mission and then go back to the Kerbal Space Center, go to the tracking station, and before we go back to our Mun Lander, I'm actually just going to destroy that spent stage that we had to dump whilst we were going to the Mun from low Kerbin orbit, and then we can go to the Mun and control Bill Kerman. Oh, the ground took a second to appear. There it is. Yes. As you can see, for some reason, our flag has now been destroyed. And I can't plant another one. Not sure what happened there, but don't worry, carry on watching the video. It will just magically come back. Really not sure what happened there. Now we need to get back on the lander. And of course, that's going to be a bit tricky, right? Because we've not got a ladder. But of course, the Mun's gravity is much, much lower than Kerbin's gravity. So we can just jump and then hit R to deploy the jetpack, or EVA pack, I suppose. And we could just steer Bill to the hatch of our lander. Use shift and control for vertical throttle and WASD for lateral movement. And you don't have to jump at the beginning, that's optional. I just think it's more fun. Now, when I was about to launch, I accidentally pressed spacebar and staged. So this is the beauty of making quick saves, everyone. Okay, and for real, before departure, let's open the map screen and see if we can find where that Mun signal is. Oh my gosh. Very frustratingly close. So, I don't know, there's a spoiler if you're playing this mission through. Land there, and then you can do the Mun signal mission right away. As it happens, we've probably not got enough Delta V to fly there, and for simplicity's sake, let's just keep this video on your first Mun landing without worrying about visiting specific sites. So, to lift off, we're going to go straight up at first, but then basically immediately tip over and start burning towards the horizon, because we just want to be increasing our horizontal speed, because that's how you orbit planets and moons. Just like on Kerbin, we want to be going east, or 90 degrees along the navful, because that's the direction the Mun rotates, which will therefore give us a little bit of extra Delta V. It's slightly more efficient to ascend with the rotation of a planet rather than against it. Just keep an eye on your apoapsis marker, specifically your time to apoapsis. If that number starts going down, you want to be nosing up a little bit. But as you can see, we're just pushing our apoapsis further and further away from us, so we know that our lander has sufficient thrust-to-weight ratio to burn straight towards the horizon. And there we are, an apoapsis of 28 kilometers. I like aiming for 30, so we'll just do one really small burn to get 30.5 kilometers. So now there's not much else to do other than coast our way to apoapsis to perform our circularization burn, which I guess we can plan in advance. Just create a maneuver plan, drag on the prograde marker until we once again see periapsis and apoapsis start to swing around and switch positions. That way you know you're getting a roughly circular orbit. And like the other times before, I'm having to just adjust it to be very slightly before our point of apoapsis in order to get the perfect circle. But again, that's just me being a bit of a perfectionist. There's no need for your orbit to be perfectly circular. An eccentric one is also fine. You don't want your periapsis to be too low though, because as you can see right now, we've only got 3 levels of time warp available to us, which means it's going to take ages to time warp up to a high point. So I'm using the power of video editing to speed up this part of the mission. And as you can see, we now have more time warp options available to us. You don't want your orbits to be too low, because otherwise it's just excruciating. And here we are approaching our maneuver plan. Let's go ahead and press Z to put the engine up to full throttle. We could do that burn, and there we are. A beautiful, roughly circular orbit there. Very nice. Now, we need to think about getting home. So this is exactly the same as the last Mun mission we did, in which we went to Mun Orbit. We're going to create a maneuver plan and drag on progrades to ensure that we're going backwards out of the Mun's sphere of influence. The Mun orbits Kerbin clockwise from this perspective on the map screen, so we want to eject backwards so that we're reducing our orbital energy, thus lowering our orbit around Kerbin, and we can keep on dragging on the prograde marker until our periapsis intercepts Kerbin's atmosphere, which is 70 kilometers. You want your periapsis to be quite a bit below 70 kilometers actually, so that you produce sufficient drag and capture and land, since the higher atmosphere is extremely thin. Here you can see I've gone for a periapsis height of 24.739 kilometers. I was aiming for 25 and felt that was close enough. And with that plotted, we can press M to leave the map screen and press the maneuver key on the SAS control panel for the ship to automatically point towards the vector we need to execute our escape burn. And then we can just time warp to the point when we need to do the burn, which is now. So 3, 2, 1. I did use a bit of the power of video editing to speed up the time warp somewhat. I know you guys are busy. We're at the half an hour mark. But as we approach the end of our burn, we're actually going to go to the map screen and then just do the last bit manually. So we're going to right-click our Kerbin periapsis of the blue line and then just really lower our throttle and then just manually get it down to that lowest part. Again, aiming for about 25. Because stopping your burn exactly when you need to on the maneuver planner is somewhat tricky. It's much easier to just look at what your actual orbit is doing and kill your velocity by watching that. And with that, we can just time warp away from the Mun. Everyone wave a tearful goodbye and return to Kerbin. You don't want to get too aggressive with your time warping though, like I did, because now we've entered the atmosphere, so we're about to start overheating and I hadn't staged. So try and not do that. Try and stop your time warp before you enter Kerbin's atmosphere, and then stage and point retrograde by pressing the retrograde key on the SAS. You know, I had an arrow earlier, didn't I? So I can just copy paste that arrow asset again. There we are. Bang. I can make it spin. I can wiggle it. I don't know. Whoa, now it's glowing. And now it's flying away. Oof, wasn't that fun? Great tutorial. But here we are, we're literally just holding retrograde and letting the heat shield to do all the work, protecting our capsule, and of course all of our science. We don't have the Science Junior on board, but of course in KSP2, when you run science experiments, you don't need to get out and move science into the command pod. It does it all automatically. It's one of those really nice quality of life improvements that the 4 Science update added. Now, one thing I haven't done is stage my parachute yet. If you stage it before completing the thermal event that is re-entry, it might deploy when things are still a bit too crispy and then get destroyed by the heating. So I'm going to wait till all of those flames have disappeared before pressing the spacebar for the final time for this mission. There you go. I think now looks like a pretty safe time to do so. Let's press space, and there goes the parachute. Before deploying it, I did press F5. You might have seen the game saved dialogue appear on screen, because parachutes, at least at this point in KSP2's life, can sometimes be a little bit glitchy. Sometimes they deploy, but then just disappear, and then you can't deploy them again, and you end up crashing into the ground. So making a quick save before you deploy it for the first time is good, so that if the parachute does glitch out, you can quick load to that point and then deploy it for the first time again, and that seems to be the easiest way of solving the broken parachute glitch. Although, as it happens, I was pretty lucky, I didn't have any problems with the parachute. And look at that, now the parachute has fully opened. So usually at this point, it's completely safe. It's when it's in that intermediate stage where it's been deployed but hasn't fully opened because you're still going too fast, you're still too high. That, at least in my own personal experience, tends to be when the parachute disappearing glitch happens. Your mileage may vary though. I don't know that much about the glitch myself personally. But as you can see, we are coming down for a touchdown in the desert, Soviet style. Boom. And there we are. Recoverable. Now, at this point, we may as well press recover because the amount of science that Bill can get by going on EVA and gathering a surface sample is pretty low. But I figured, well, when I did a surface sample collection on the Mun, the surface sample tube glitched and it sort of floated out of his hand. So let's try again. But as you can see, Kraken did not want my plan. I got the glitch again. I don't know if it's because I accidentally pressed the M key and opened the map screen for a split second and the animations got desynced. Any developers watching? There's a little thing to maybe write down to investigate why that might have happened. Anyway, we can press escape and press recover vessel. And, it's disappeared. So now we can press KSC to take us to the Kerbal Space Center from there. We get a mission control just to make sure we definitely did hand in all of our contracts, which of course we did. And then we can go to research and development to unlock some things in tier 2 of the tech tree. So here we are. As you can see, we have 867 science points to work with. So to begin with, we haven't got much choice. We have to unlock medium orbital rockets. But that gives us the Poodle engine, which is a really good vacuum optimized engine, as well as a nice big fuel tank. And we get a nice big Apollo-style 3-seat command pod. So this is a good investment anyway. So we'll research that. Next, I want to research fuel lines. This gives us the external fuel duct, which allows us to make rockets with fuel crossfeed. Therefore, more efficient rockets. This would be a very useful thing to have. After that, we've only got 337 science points left, so we can only afford to unlock one more node, and it has to be either enhanced electronics, expanded construction, or precision aerodynamics. It doesn't really matter which one, but one of the nodes we really want to get is atmospheric science, because this gets us more science experiments, which means we get more science from our missions, which means we can unlock more of the tech tree. So because of this node requiring enhanced electronics, we'll research enhanced electronics. There we are. And that's pretty much where we're going to leave this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you had fun playing along, if indeed you did play along. I guess next episode has already been decided. We're going to have to go back to the Mun to investigate that mysterious signal. But we can have some fun along the way and do all of the secondary contracts as well. So next video will probably end up being 2 launches. So look forward to that. And of course now, massive thank you to my patrons. Their names are on screen. There was my YouTube channel member names as well there. They help support what I do here financially and make all of this content possible. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode and had a fun old time. There's 2 video suggestions on screen that are from my YouTube channel that YouTube thinks you'll like. So hopefully they're good picks. And yeah, again, if you did like the video, leaving a like down below really helps. Make sure you hit subscribe as well for more KSP and space news content every Monday and Saturday. And I'll see you in the next one.